In the middle of the 17th century, the three kingdoms of England, Scotland, and Ireland were torn apart by one of the most devastating conflicts in British history. From 1642 to 1651, brother fought against brother, and father against son, in a series of brutal civil wars that would forever change the political and social landscape of these nations. What began as a dispute between King Charles I and Parliament over power and religious authority escalated into full-scale warfare that would claim the lives of hundreds of thousands and question the very foundation of monarchy itself. The English civil wars were not merely battles over territory or succession, but a fundamental struggle over how nations should be governed and who holds the ultimate authority over the people. King Charles I had ruled with increasing tension with his parliament for years. His belief in the divine right of kings clashed fundamentally with Parliament's growing assertion that they represented the will of the people and should have a say in how the nation was governed. When civil war finally erupted in 1642, the kingdom split into two factions. The Royalists, loyal to the king and often called Cavaliers, and the Parliamentarians, known as Roundheads for their closely cropped hair. The First English Civil War raged from 1642 to 1646, followed by a brief Second Civil War in 1648. Despite initial successes, the Royalist cause ultimately crumbled before the disciplined might of Parliament's new model army, led by the formidable Oliver Cromwell. When the smoke of battle finally cleared and Parliament emerged victorious, the nation faced an unprecedented question. What should be done with a defeated king? Charles I was tried for high treason against his own people, an act that had never before occurred in English history. The trial was controversial, and many considered it illegal, but the parliamentarians were determined to make an example. On the 30th of January, 1649, in front of the banqueting house in Whitehall, King Charles I stepped onto a wooden scaffold and faced the executioner's axe. With a single stroke, the executioner severed not just the king's head, but severed England from centuries of unbroken monarchical tradition. This shocking act sent tremors throughout Europe and earned the conflict the name of the English Revolution by some historians. With the king dead and his heir, Prince Charles, fled to France, Parliament moved swiftly to dismantle the old order. The monarchy itself was abolished, along with the House of Lords. The medieval Star Chamber, which had been the king's privy council responsible for maintaining order, was dissolved. Royal estates, comprising approximately 10% of all land in England, were seized and sold off to pay war debts. However, despite these dramatic changes at the top of government, life for ordinary commoners remained largely unchanged. The same local magistrates and officials continued to govern their communities, and as one historian noted, there was merely a shift of power within the wealthy landowning class, but not away from them. The revolution, it seemed, had not reached down to improve the lot of common farmers and laborers. Rising from the chaos emerged Oliver Cromwell, a country gentleman turned military genius who had led Parliament's armies to victory. Cromwell now took control of the nation as Lord Protector of the newly declared Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland. This was no democracy, however, but a military dictatorship. The country was divided into military districts, each governed by a major general answerable to Cromwell. England had traded one form of authoritarian rule for another, though this time cloaked in the language of republicanism and godly governance. Cromwell and his supporters genuinely believed they were doing God's work, creating a Protestant nation free from the corruptions of monarchy and the Catholic Church. Scotland and Ireland faced their own upheavals in the wake of Parliament's victory. Scotland had initially remained loyal to the crown and recognized young Prince Charles as their rightful king, but Cromwell would not tolerate this divided loyalty. The Kirk, the center of Scottish Presbyterian worship, was dissolved, as was the Scottish Parliament. In place of their own governance, 30 Scottish representatives were sent south to sit in the Westminster Parliament, their independent voice reduced to a mere fraction. Ireland suffered even more grievously. In 1650, Cromwell led a brutal campaign to suppress an Irish rebellion, and his methods were merciless. Catholic landowners had their properties confiscated wholesale and given to Protestant settlers. By the time Cromwell was finished, Protestants controlled more than half of all Irish territory, setting the stage for centuries of sectarian conflict to come. Though Cromwell disbanded Parliament in 1653, frustrated by their inability to agree on legislation, the institution had grown significantly more powerful during the war years. The Long Parliament of 1640 had passed crucial acts that changed England's governance forever. These acts required the king to call Parliament at least once every 3 years, prevented the monarch from dissolving Parliament at will, and demanded that royal ministers be approved by Parliament itself. When Cromwell dissolved the Assembly, he replaced it with himself and a small council of state composed of trusted allies. He had become, in effect, a king in all but name, backed by the professional new model army that he himself had created. The human cost of the English civil wars was staggering beyond anything the British Isles had experienced before. With over 600 battles and sieges fought across a decade of conflict, perhaps 100,000 soldiers perished on the battlefields. But this number tells only part of the story, as countless small skirmishes went unrecorded, and many wounded died later from their injuries or from disease in unsanitary military camps. Major battles like Edgehill in 1642 saw 1,500 deaths, while Marston Moor in 1644 claimed 4,500 Royalist lives. At Dunbar in 1650, 3,000 Scots fell before Cromwell's army. When civilian deaths are added to military casualties, the total reaches approximately 200,000 people, a proportion of the population that, remarkably, exceeded even the devastating losses of the First World War centuries later. During the war years, a large portion of the male population found themselves drawn into the fighting. Historians estimate that during each campaigning season of 1643, 1644, and 1645, more than 1 in 10 men aged between 16 and 60 were bearing arms. Over the course of the entire conflict, perhaps 1 in 4 adult men took up weapons at some point. For those who remained civilians, life became a desperate struggle for survival. Over 150 cities and towns, 100 villages, and around 200 country manors found themselves directly caught up in the violence. Approximately 300 sieges occurred, with casualties from these alone totaling 21,000. Communities that found themselves in the path of armies faced robbery, requisition of supplies, and violence. Soldiers billeted in an area would ransack local homes for food and valuables, often giving worthless promissory notes in exchange. Civilians pressed into service found themselves digging massive earthwork defenses around cities and castles, their backs breaking under the weight of picks and shovels. Then, after a siege ended, these same people would be forced to destroy what they had built, tearing down fortifications in a process called slighting. Parliament deliberately ordered the destruction of many medieval castles to ensure they could never be used in warfare again. sometimes blowing up their towers with gunpowder. Historic buildings, churches, and manor houses were looted, vandalized, or left to ruin. Cities like Bristol, Chester, and Colchester suffered particularly heavy bombardment from artillery, requiring a generation to rebuild. 1 in 10 people in urban areas lost their homes entirely. Throughout all of this, everyone faced crushing taxation from both sides, with levies imposed on all forms of income payable weekly or monthly, draining what little wealth ordinary people possessed. From the chaos and upheaval of the civil wars emerged an unexpected consequence, an explosion of new religious and political ideas. With the traditional authority of monarchy and the Anglican Church hierarchy shattered, people began to question everything about how they worshipped and how they should be governed. Various Protestant groups, which had previously existed on the fringes of society or in secret, now found themselves able to openly discuss and publish their beliefs. The printing press became a weapon mightier than any sword, with the number of published works skyrocketing from just 22 new titles in 1640 to over 1,000 per year by 1660. Pamphlets and newspapers appeared on streets, written in accessible English rather than Latin, shouting competing visions of how society should be organized and how believers should approach God. Among the most prominent groups to emerge were the Independents, who called for individual believers to follow their own consciences free from any centralized church authority. The Presbyterians, by contrast, wanted a structured church hierarchy, though less rigid than before. The Levellers, particularly influential in Parliament's new model army, demanded radical reforms including wider voting rights, redistribution of wealth, and the farming of common land. Their even more radical cousins, the Diggers, attempted to create entirely self-sufficient communities. The Quakers insisted that believers should look only within themselves for spiritual guidance and criticized the wealthy for failing to help the poor. Meanwhile, the Ranters claimed divine visions inspired their actions, and some even declared that sin did not exist. The Fifth Monarchists believed that Charles's reign had been the last earthly kingdom, and that Jesus Christ would soon return to rule for 1,000 years. Oliver Cromwell attempted to impose his strict Puritan vision on the nation through various acts of Parliament and outright repression, particularly of Catholics. His government banned activities they considered frivolous or ungodly, including the celebration of Christmas and playing football on Sundays. These wildly unpopular measures revealed how out of touch the Puritan leadership had become with ordinary people who wanted to maintain their traditional customs and celebrations. Cromwell may have won the military war across 3 kingdoms, but he had not won the hearts of the people who lived in them. His government survived only through the threat of military force, and when he died in 1658, his chosen successor, his son Richard Cromwell, found himself without support from either the army or the people. To avoid another devastating civil war, Parliament and the army agreed to invite Charles I's son to return from his long exile in France. In 1660, the restoration of the monarchy took place, and Charles II ascended to the throne of England. All of Oliver Cromwell's acts of Parliament dating from March 1642 were officially cancelled. However, the critical acts of 1641 that had been passed to end Charles I's period of personal rule remained in force, meaning Parliament was now permanently more powerful than it had been before the wars. The brief experiment in republican government had failed, but it had changed England forever. The restored monarchy would never again wield absolute power, and the groundwork had been laid for England and Scotland to unite in a system heading towards true parliamentary democracy. The legacy of the English Civil Wars extends far beyond the decade in which they were fought. The conflict proved that a king could be held accountable to the people, and that Parliament could wield real power over the crown. The explosion of printed material and new ideas created a marketplace of political and religious thought that could never be fully suppressed again. The professional New Model Army created during the wars established the template for modern military organization. The suffering endured by hundreds of thousands of people across England, Scotland, and Ireland served as a stark reminder of the costs of civil conflict. Though the monarchy was restored, the relationship between Crown and Parliament, between government and governed, had been fundamentally altered. The seeds of modern democracy, religious tolerance, and constitutional government had been planted in the blood-soaked soil of the English Civil Wars, even if it would take generations for them to fully flower. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more fascinating historical content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the events that shaped our world. See you in the next one.